The sky was burning red and black as smoke rose high above the battlefield where metal clashed with metal and fire rained down like angry gods from the stars. Above, Captain Rowe moved through the wreckage slowly, one hand on his rifle, the other steady at his side as he stepped over broken armor and scorched stone. He was tired, bruised, and covered in ash, but alive. Humans were pulling back, the last line was falling, and the final dropship waited near the edge of the ruined city. The radio in his ear crackled sharply. "Captain Rowe, report your position now." "I'm 10 minutes from evac," he said, breathing heavy, picking up wounded along the way. "Negative," came the cold reply. "New orders from command. Leave the wounded behind." "Repeat, do not waste time on enemy survivors." He stopped in his tracks, eyes narrowing. Enemy survivors. He turned a corner and froze. There she was, a Zelari warrior, tall and proud, even now lying in the rubble, her lower body crushed under a collapsed walker. Her armor cracked, her breathing shallow. Her skin was a pale silver blue, glowing softly under the dust of battle. Her long dark hair was tangled with blood and debris, but her eyes still held fire. She looked up at him without fear, without a single word. Rowe raised his rifle, just slightly unsure she was their enemy, a fighter who had likely killed dozens of his own, and yet there was no weapon in her hand, no strength left in her limbs. Both of her legs were gongon burned, clean through just above the knee, her body half buried in stone, her blood pooling around her like ink in water. And yet she did not cry out. She stared at him like she was daring him to finish the job. His hand shook. The sound of gunfire echoed in the distance, reminding him that time was running out. His squad was already ahead. The last dropship engines were powering up. "Leave." The order said, "Leave them all." He stepped closer. "You understand me?" he asked. Softly she blinked once, then nodded her head once. Slow and proud he lowered the rifle. "What's your name?" he asked. There was silence for a moment, then a rasping voice answered. "Kelthery." She said the word thick and rough, like a blade dragged over stone. Rowe swallowed hard. "Kelthery of the ones bred for battle, the ones who never surrendered." She should be dead, but she was not. And somehow he could not walk away. "You fought hard," he said as he knelt beside her. "No shame in falling in war." She coughed dryly but said nothing. His hand reached out slowly and gently brushed rubble from her side. "You're not going to make it if I leave you here," he said, "and they told me to leave you here." Her gaze flickered toward the sky, then back to his eyes. "I know," she whispered. Then she did something strange. She reached out her hand, weak and shaking, and placed it against his chest. Armor, a silent gesture, not of surrender but of choice, as if to say, "You may leave me or take me, but I will not beg." Rowe looked down at her hand, and then up at the fire, still dancing across the ruins. "A choice is choice." The cum buzzed again. "Captain, where are you? We are lifting off now." "Repeat, where are you?" Rowe pressed the side of his helmet. "Delay takeoff. I have one more," he said. "Is it human?" came the sharp reply. "No." "Then leave them. That's an order." He looked at Kelthery again. She was still looking at him, not begging, not asking, waiting. He reached down slowly and wrapped one arm round her shoulders, the other under what was left of her legs. She tensed in pain as he lifted her, but made no sound. He stood with her in his arms and turned away from the radio. He walked into the smoke heat, walked into the fire, and behind him, the radio kept screaming, but he didn't listen anymore. All he heard was her heartbeat, steady and strong against his armor, and all she saw was a human marine carrying her through a war she thought had already killed her. In that moment, two enemies became something else in the story. Began a story not of war but of choice and fire and the promise of something more. The world around them burned with heat and chaos as Captain Rowe moved forward through the smoke and ruin, with the broken alien warrior in his arms, her name still fresh in his mind, like a quiet whisper in a storm. Kelther, her blood had soaked into his armor, but he did not stop. He did not slow. Every step was heavy with weight, not just from her broken body, but from the orders he had disobeyed, from the line he had crossed. Behind him, the battlefield cried out like a wounded beast. Ahead of him, fire danced across broken walls, and metal skeletons of fallen machines reached toward the sky like dead gods. Kelthery said nothing, her body tense and cold, her eyes watching his face as if trying to understand this human who carried her when even her own kind had left her behind. Rowe said nothing either. He only kept walking through the fire and ash, his breath steady, his eyes locked on the shadows moving between the rubble. There was danger here, danger that cared nothing for flags or uniforms. Drones, machines built to finish what war started. They moved like wolves, sleek and fast, with sharp claws and eyes that glowed red in the dark. Rowe ducked into a half-collapsed building, its roof broken, and walls cracked just enough to give them cover. He lowered Kelthery gently against the wall and knelt beside her, scanning the edges of the street with careful eyes. She looked at him, her voice low and raspy. "You should not have come back for me." He looked at her, and answered with a quiet breath. I couldn't leave you there. Her lips twitched into something like a sad smile. We were enemies, not anymore, he said, as he checked his weapon. A soft sound outside made them both freeze. A click, then a low hum, the sound of metal claws scraping the bone row. Pulled Kelthry closer behind a metal plate, and raised his rifle slowly. She reached for her belt, pulling free. A small curved blade burned on one edge, the only thing she still had from her fallen armor. Her hands shook, but her eyes burned. The drone stepped into view, its head turning side to side, scanning for heat. For Lefro waited, holding his breath. Kelthry's fingers tightened on the blade, her body tensing to strike. Even without legs, she would not go down without a fight. The drone moved past them, slowly, and Ro counted each second, like it was his last. 1, 2, 3. Then it was gone. He exhaled, and slumped back for a moment, letting the tension bleed out of his shoulders. Kelthry looked at him with something new in her eyes, not just curiosity, respect, maybe even trust. He lifted her again carefully, and stepped back into the smoke, his eyes scanning high and low, always watching, always ready. The ruins twisted around them like a maze, fire leaping from corner to corner, as if trying to trap them in its burning. Cadro didn't stop even when his legs began to shake, even when the smoke burned his throat, even when Kelthry's weight became too much for one man. He carried her. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, and closed her eyes, not in sleep, but in surrender to the moment. She had expected death, but this human carried her like she mattered, like she was still a warrior, not just broken meat left behind. The wind howled above them, carrying ash and sparks across the sky, and in the far distance, the sound of engines echoed faint and cold. Ro paused near a broken pillar, and set her down again gently, his hands shaking from exhaustion. Have to keep moving, he said. The evac zone's still far, and we're out of time. Kelthry nodded, her breath thin. I can crawl if you know. He cut in without anger, only quiet resolve. You fought enough already. She looked at him and whispered, why do you care? He stared out at the smoke, and Ruin then looked back at her. I don't know, maybe because I saw someone worth saving. She blinked once, slowly, then turned her head away, not to hide tears, but to hide her confusion. This was not how war was meant to be, and yet here they were, human, and a Zelari warrior, moving together through a world that had forgotten them. Both. He lifted her again, his arms numb, his legs heavy. She did not speak again, not for a long time, but she never looked away from his face, and he never let go. Together they moved like shadows between fire and metal, hunted by machines, forgotten by command, lost in the ruins of a war that had chewed up everything and spat it out as dust. But they were not dust, not yet. They were still moving, still breathing, still alive, and somewhere ahead in the smoke hope waited, even if neither of them dared to believe it yet. The cave was dark and cold and quiet. The fire flickered low, casting soft light over broken stone and tired faces. Captain Ro sat near the entrance, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the shadows outside, while Kelthry rested against the wall, her body wrapped in a thermal sheet torn from his own supplies outside. The wind howled across the ruined land, bringing with it the smell of ash and burnt metal, and something else, something older, something wild. Kelthry did not speak for a long time, her eyes half closed, her body still, her breathing slow and shallow. But steady. Ro watched her from the corner of his eye, not with fear or mistrust, but with something else. Something softer, something careful. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small ration bar, breaking it in two. He held one piece toward her. She opened her eyes and looked at it, then at him. I do not eat human food, she said weakly. You do now, he replied. With a quiet voice she stared at the bar, then took it slowly, her fingers brushing his for just a moment, before she pulled back. There was silence between them for a while. The kind of silence that comes after fire and blood and choices no one can take back. Then Kelthry spoke again, her voice rough like stone, dragged across steel. You asked why my people left me. Ro didn't answer, not right away. He waited, letting her speak when she was ready. My commander gave the order before I fell, she said, eyes staring into the fire. We were pinned behind enemy lines, half our squad was gone, we had no way out, and he said we were to retreat at once. Her fingers curled slightly around the ration bar. I told him I would cover the escape. I had a heavy cannon and good ground, and I thought I could hold them just long enough. She paused, her face tight with something bitter. He agreed too quickly. He said, go if you wish, warrior, and then he left me, before I could even finish setting the cannon. Her voice cracked then, but she did not cry. The enemy was faster than I expected. I tried to hold them, but the cannon overheated, and the blast took my legs, and then I was crawling, screaming for help, but no one came, not even a voice on the channel, not even a whisper. Ro listened in silence, his eyes on the fire. They left me like I was nothing, like I was a tool that broke in their hands. Kelthry turned her head and looked at him, her eyes glowing faint in the firelight. And then you came, the enemy, the human, and you carried me through fire and ash like I was worth saving. Ro met her gaze and said nothing for a long time. Then he whispered, "You were." She looked away again, staring into the flame. "I hated your kind once. I was raised to, I was trained to, but now I do not know what to think." Ro leaned back against the wall, his body aching, his armor scratched and burned and bent in places where fire and teeth had tried to tear it away. He looked up at the rocky ceiling above and thought of all the things he had seen in this war, all the bodies, all the broken lives, all the voices lost to static and silence. "I don't know what this war was really for," he said quietly, "but I know what it took from us." Kelthry nodded slowly. "It took my legs. And my name, my rank, my place, my people." Ro turned toward her. "But it didn't take your spirit." She looked at him, her eyes wet, but not from tears. "You are strange for a human," he smiled faintly. "You're strange for an alien." She actually laughed then, a weak laugh, dry and low, but real. Outside the wind screamed again, and something far away gave a long low howl that made both of them sit up. Stretero reached for his rifle, and Kelthry grabbed her blade. "You hear that?" he asked, already moving toward the entrance. She nodded. "That was not a drone, that was alive." Ro crouched low, peering through a crack in the stones. Something moved in the distance, a shape big and fast, with long limbs and glowing as Kelthry whispered, "Scavenger beast, they feed on the dying, they smell blood." Ro cursed under his breath. "They'll smell yours from a mile away." She looked at him then. "He should go now while you can." He turned toward her, his face hard. "I didn't carry you this far to leave you to monsters." Kelthry stared at him for a long moment. Then she gripped her blade tighter and said, "Then we fight together." War brother. Ro smiled without humor and nodded side by side. In the cave lit by a dying fire, two warriors, once enemies, now bound by choice and fire, waited for the night to come. The cave shook with the growl of something ancient and hungry. Something not born from science or machine, but from the forgotten wild places left behind by war and fire. Scavenger beast moved through the shadows outside, its breath heavy, its steps slow and cruel like it knew. The two warriors inside could not run. Captain Ro checked his weapon, quietly counting his remaining shots, and finding the number too low for comfort. His hands moved fast but calm, the way a soldier learns when panic means death. Kelthry sat near the fire, her blade in hand, her arms tense, her eyes locked on the entrance, with no fear, only readiness. She spoke first, her voice low and steady. "That sound is not made by something small." Ro gave a quiet nod, his voice almost a breath. "No, it's not, and it's not alone." She blinked slowly. "How many?" He looked toward the crack in the rock. "Two, maybe three. They're circling. They know we're here." Kelthry shifted her weight, pulling herself closer to the wall, her legs still gone, her blood now dried into black patches across the torn fabric she had once called armor. "I cannot run," she said. "I know," he answered. She glanced at him, then back to the door. "Yet you do not leave." He looked at her fully then, his voice firm. "I don't leave people behind, not anymore." A long silence passed between them, not cold, not angry, but something sharper, something full of fire and truth. Then came the sound again, claws scraping stone, breath like steam, teeth grinding, and a snarl that echoed deep into the cave like thunder without Skyco. Thari tightened her grip on the blade, her arms already shaking, but her face steady. "Like stone carved from war, they hunt in packs." She said, "They test your walls, then your fear, then your strength." Ro crouched lower and slid a small combat knife across the ground toward her. "If they come close, use this to strike fast. Aim for the eyes." She caught the knife with one hand and looked at it like it was a gift of honor. He moved to the entrance and leaned against the wall, gun raised, eyes sharp, ears wide. The first one came into view, then tall and thin with skin like burned leather and long limbs bent wrong. Its mouth stretched wide, its eyes glowing green like sick fire. It stopped just outside the entrance, sniffed the air and stepped closer. Ro aimed but waited. He counted the seconds, watched the muscles under its skin twitching like wires ready to snap, stepped again. Then a second one crawled over the rocks above the entrance, its head twisting in circles, its claws scratching against the cave roof. Kelthry whispered, "They are waiting for fear." Ro nodded once. "Then we give them fire." Instead, with a roar, he stepped forward and fired 3 shots fast and loud, the noise shaking the cave, the light flashing across the stone walls. The first beast screamed as it fell back, black blood spraying across the rocks. The second one dropped down from above, mouth wide, claws raised, but Kelthry struck before it landed, her blade slicing across its face, her knife stabbing upward into its throat, her arms burning with effort, her scream loud and proud. The beast fell beside her, twitching and gurgling, its eyes wide with pain and surprise. Ro turned and fired again deeper into the night, as a third shape darted between rocks then vanished. He backed into the cave, breathing hard, sweat on his face, ash in his mouth. Kelthari sat, still blood on her arms, but her eyes blazing with fire. "You fight like a Zelari," she said. Dro grinned. "Without joy you kill like a human." She actually laughed, a sharp sound that echoed through the cave, and out into the night more silence, then only wind, and the sound of flames dying. Thoreau dragged the beasts away from the cave, and tossed them down the slope, their blood marking the rocks, as warning for whatever might come next. When he returned, Kelthari was watching him, her face unreadable. "You could have left while they fought me," she said. He sat beside her and shook his head. "I gave you my word." She turned toward the fire, her voice soft. "You are not like others, not your kind, not mine. You walk a path between honor and madness." He looked at her and replied, "Maybe that's where the truth lives." They said nothing more as the fire faded, and the stars above watched through the cracks in the stone, their light cold and distant, but steady. Two warriors, once enemies, now allies, sat together in a cave filled with the smell of blood and smoke, their weapons near, their hearts open, but guarded. And though night ruled the world, inside, the fire of survival still burned. The morning came with no sun, only a pale gray sky that stretched over the broken land like a blanket soaked in ash and sorrow. The wind had changed, carrying the scent of oil, fire, and something else. Something sharp and wrong. Captain Rowe moved with careful steps, his armor scratched and bent, his rifle held low, as he guided Kelthari across the cracked stone path that led to the southern ridge, the last known way out of the war zone. She was strapped to his back, now her arms wrapped around his shoulders, her face pressed near his neck, her breathing soft but steady, each bump in the ground a flash of pain in her voice, each step a test of strength and will. The mountains ahead looked like teeth rising from the ground, their peaks broken, their slopes carved by bombs and storms of war and death. Below them, far below, lay a deep canyon filled with smoke and fog, and echoes it had no name, just a warning. Rose stopped at the edge of the cliff and looked down. The drop was long, the bottom lost in the haze, but the path behind them was gone, the cave far behind, and the beasts that roamed at night would return soon. Kelthari looked over his shoulder, her voice a whisper. "There's no bridge." He nodded slowly. "It collapsed 2 days ago. Command said it was still standing, but they were wrong." She did not answer right away, then said with calm sadness, "You should climb down alone. Leave me here. I will slow you." He turned to her, his eyes sharp and full of fire. "You said that once before, and I ignored you. I will ignore it again." She shook her head. "I am only weight now. I am not a warrior without my legs. Not here, not now." He set her down gently near a large stone and crouched beside her. "I did not carry you through drones and beasts and fire, just to let you die on a cliff." She looked into his eyes and saw no fear, no hesitation, no pity, only choice. She whispered, "Then you are a fool." He smiled, a tired smile. "Maybe, but I'm your fool now." She laughed again, her voice weak but alive, and she reached up and touched his face with one hand, her fingers cool and rough. Then the sound came, metal wings above, the scream of a scout drone slicing through the air, fast and hungry, its red eye scanning the cliff, its weapon charging with a high-pitched whine. Rowe grabbed Kelthari and ran. The drone stone exploded behind them, shards cutting into his back as he leaped over the edge. The wind tore the scream from Kelthari's throat as they fell. Rowe wrapped his arms around her tight, his back toward the ground, his body a shield. The fall was a blur of gray and wind and sound, then impact. They hit a sloped patch of metal debris and bounced, slid, rolled down into the fog until silence returned. Rowe groaned and opened his eyes, pain sharp in his ribs, blood in his mouth, but he was alive. He looked down. Kelthari was still in his arms, bruised and shaken, but breathing. She opened her eyes slowly. "You are mad." He coughed and nodded. Little bit. They lay still for a while, surrounded by twisted steel and broken earth, the sky above just a thin line of light at the top of the canyon. No drones, no beasts, just silence. Echo. "Theri broke it. You jumped for me." He looked at her. "Yes, you knew we might die." "Yes." She closed her eyes again and whispered, "Then I was wrong. You are not a fool. You are something else." He smiled. "Don't say hero. I hate that word." She chuckled softly. "No, not hero, just human." He helped her sit up slowly, careful of her wounds, careful of his own, then stood and looked around. There was a narrow path between rocks, leading deeper into the canyon. Maybe it would bring them to the other side, maybe not, but there was no way back. He lifted her again, this time slower, every muscle screaming, every step a challenge. She did not argue. She rested her head against him and said, "If we survive this, I owe you a life debt." He kept walking. "If we survive this, I want something better than a debt." She smiled against his shoulder like What he thought for a moment, then said a story, one told in both your language and mine, one where enemies became more than survivors. She closed her eyes and said I would tell that story to every child born of war. Together they moved. Through the canyon, through the smoke and shadows, through the silence that comes after fire. They had jumped from the edge of reason into the unknown and lived in now. All they had to do was keep moving forward, and maybe, just maybe, find the other side. The canyon air grew colder as they moved between walls of stone and wire, the sky above a thin crack of fading light, while the world around them whispered with wind and silence. The path had narrowed, forcing Captain Rowe to carry Kelthury across jagged rocks and broken ground, each step harder than the last. His breath short, his arms burning his back. Atching Kelthury watched him with tired eyes, her voice soft but steady. You are breaking yourself for me. Rowe grunted and shook his head. No, I am walking with you. That is different. She gave a faint smile and looked away. Not out of shame, but something deeper, something harder to name. The path turned and opened into a small hollow between sharp cliffs and old wreckage. Long forgotten ships lay buried in the dust, their bones rusted, their lights long dead. But Rowe saw something else there, something blinking in the dark. Come relay, half crushed and half buried, but still alive. Its light blinking in slow rhythm, like a heartbeat, like a ghost. He set Kelthury down near a slab of metal and moved toward it, hope rising in his chest like a flame after too many cold nights there. Panel sparked as he opened it, wires tangled and cracked, but not beyond repair. He worked fast, hands moving with memory and instinct, while Kelthury kept watch. Her blade across her lap, her eyes alert. Then the static cleared, and the device beeped once. Loud and sharp, a voice came through, broken, but clear enough. This is Pelican Echo 9 broadcasting. On emergency channel, any survivors respond. Now repeat, any survivors respond. Rowe grabbed the mic and pressed down hard. This is Captain Rowe of Unit 17. I have one injured, requesting evac coordinates. Ready, say again. Evac requested. The voice paused, then returned. Captain Rowe, we read you. Copy status and number of survivors. Rowe looked at Kelthury, then spoke without delay. One human, one Zalari, wounded but stable, requesting evac for both. Repeat, for both. Silence. Again, this time longer, colder, sharper. Then the voice came back, colder than before. Human confirmed. Zalari not authorized for extraction. Leave the non-human behind and proceed to evac zone alone. Repeat, leave the alien and proceed alone. Rowe's hand clenched around the mic, his jaw tight, his heart pounding like war drums in his chest. He looked at Kelthury, who sat still, her face blank, her eyes unreadable. She spoke first, her voice even. They will not take me, I expected. This. Rowe looked away, then at the radio, then back at her. You expected it, and still came with me. She nodded. Not for rescue, for journey. I wanted to see if your kind had souls beyond fire. He walked to her, crouched down, and stared into her eyes. I am not leaving you. Not now, not ever. She touched his face gently, her fingers cold. They will leave without you. You know this is true. He stood, walked back to the relay, and stared at the blinking light that had once felt like hope. Now it felt like chains. Then, with one hard swing, he smashed the device, sparks flying as metal cracked, and the light died. For Kelthury blinked in surprise. What have you done? Rowe turned toward her, fire in his eyes. I made my decision. I do not need their permission to choose who I walk beside. She stared at him a long moment, then gave a soft smile that was foolish and brave and something else entirely. He nodded. Human. She laughed a little. Yes, that word fits you well. They stayed in the hollow. That night, no fire, no sound, just stars above and breath between them. In the morning they moved again, deeper into the canyon, toward the old path that led to the border between what was once war and what might be peace. Rowe carried her without complaint, without pause, without regret. Each time he stumbled, she pulled herself tighter to him, whispered words in her own language, words he did not understand but felt deep inside, like music in the blood. He did not know where the path would end or what waited at the edge of this broken land, but he knew she would be there beside him, and that was enough for now and maybe forever. The wind changed again, this time carrying no smoke, no ash, only the soft whisper of clean air and wild trees somewhere ahead. The edge of the canyon was near the cliffs, no longer closed tight around them, and the sky above grew wide and blue and open like a dream. Rowe felt the change before he saw it, a weight lifting from his chest, though his arms still burned and his legs still trembled from carrying her all this way. Kelthury rested against his back, her head low, her voice quiet but steady. I can smell water. He nodded and kept moving one step at a time, across the broken stones and sunlit earth, toward a ridge that rose like a crown over the land. They climbed together, she holding tight, he pushing forward, until at last they reached the top and saw the world waiting beyond. There was no fire, no war, no metal beasts in the valley below, only green hills and flowing rivers and scattered Trees swaying under soft clouds. For a long time they said nothing, only breathing, only looking. Then Kelthary whispered, "This is not a place for soldiers," Ro answered with a quiet voice. "Maybe not, but it is a place for survivors." He set her down gently on a soft patch of grass and collapsed beside her, his armor scarred, his face lined with dust and blood, his eyes closed for a moment, to rest, to dream, to believe. She sat in silence, watching him, watching the way he breathed, the way his hands stayed near his weapon, even in peace, the way his body curled slightly, not from fear but from habits. He was still a warrior, but something had changed in him. Something deep and real. Kelthary reached into the pouch at her waist and pulled out a small silver shard, the last piece of her command badge. Cracked and burned, she held it up to the light, then pressed it into the earth beside her. "I am no longer one of them," she said. "They left me to die, and called it duty." Ro opened his eyes and looked at her, his voice firm but gentle. "Then make your own duty." She turned toward him slowly, her face unreadable. "My own," he nodded. "Yes, your own path, your own oath, not one given by command or code, but one chosen." She looked down at the grass under her fingers, the sun warm on her skin, the wind soft in her hair, and for the first time in her life she felt something she had never known before. Freedom, no ranks, no orders, no expectations, only breath and choice. And the man beside her, who had carried her through the fire. She spoke again, her voice strong. "Then I choose to walk with you, even if I cannot walk. I choose it." Still, he smiled, tired and proud, and helped her sit upright. They stayed there for hours, watching the clouds move, listening to birds sing, seeing life return to a world they thought was lost in. The days that followed, they built a shelter near the river, not big, not strong, but enough. Ro found pieces of scrap and began shaping a frame. Kelthary drew symbols from her culture into the wood, marks of honor and memory. He built legs for her. Not perfect, not fast, but steady, made from drone parts and armor plates, each piece shaped by hand, with care and fire. The first time she stood with them, her arms around his shoulders, her balance shaky but proud, she laughed, a full bright sound that echoed through the valley like music. "I walk again," she said, "with human legs built by human hands and a Zalari soul." He answered. They trained together, slowly, carefully. He taught her how to move with the new limbs, and she taught him how to fight with grace and flow and silence. They became not just fighters, not just survivors, but something more. Partners. The seasons changed, and the war beyond the horizon faded into memory. Old names turned to dust, and new ones rose from stories of many races. Began to speak of the legend, the tale of a human marine who carried a broken alien warrior through fire and monsters, through war and betrayal, into the land beyond battle. They said he was strong as stone and gentle as rain. They said she was fierce as fire and proud as the stars. And together they walked into the world, not as enemies, not as ghosts, but as the start of something new. A bridge between blood and hope, between past and future, between the weight of war and the light of peace. No one remembered the exact place or day they vanished into the hills, but the story remained told in whispers around campfires, told in classrooms and barracks, told by elders and children and dreamers, the human and the alien who refused to leave each other, the ones who chose to walk together when the world said no. They were not heroes. They were not gods. They were simply two souls who carried each other through fire, and that was enough to become legend.